Welcome back. This is Friday lunchtime. The Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is defending his decision to throw SAA a R10.5 billion lifeline. He is insisting that the money allocated to SAA in the medium-term budget policy statement is not a bailout because the funds, he says, will bankroll the airline's business rescue process. Is that just semantics? Is the criticism unfair? Let me bring in Guy Leitch, the editor of the authoritative trade publication SA Flyer. Not a bailout, Guy, says the Finance Minister, because the funds will bankroll the airline's business rescue process. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, hi, Jeremy. It's semantics. It is just another bailout. If there was a reversion back to the original notion of SAA version 2.0, as it was called, where there would be a whole new zero-based budgeting, a whole new airline, well, then I think one could argue maybe it was a recapitalisation or a restart and not a bailout. But this is very much a bailout. This is, of this 10 billion, I've got a breakdown. A lot of it is going into historic debt. For instance, 2.2 billion going into the voluntary severance packages and the 189 retrenchment packages, which will be a huge relief to all those pilots and all the rest of the employees who haven't been paid. But the fact of the matter is, this is just yet more money played into the endless bottomless pit that is SAA.
The Public Enterprises Minister, Guy, accusing critics, I guess such as yourself, of financial or lack of financial literacy because an SAA liquidation scenario, he says, would cost the government more than 18 billion rand, which is obviously a lot more than the 10.5. How do you respond to that?
That's also nonsense. And I'm not going to mince my words about that. No one actually believes that 10.5 billion is sufficient to save the airline or turn it around. This is just literally a stopgap before it comes back to the begging bowl again. The current estimates to turn the airline around are in the order of 30 to 40 billion rand. So really the first loss would once again be the best loss. In fact, not the first loss, this loss, an 18 billion rand loss, to wrap it up and get back to the proposed SAA version 2.0 with a clean sheet would be a far better bet. The real problem is that they are burdening the airline once again with legacy debt and with a whole bunch of legacy problems, including political interference, because government has insisted that it needs to use the airline or have the airline as a tool for transformation and development, which means that it will never be attractive to an equity partner to buy into the airline.
You use the word stopgap, so what you're really telling me, and I think you've alluded to it anyway, is that there's absolutely no guarantee that in the next couple of weeks the airline is not going to come back begging bowl in hand.
Absolutely. The 10.5 billion was predicated on the business rescue practitioners' original business rescue plan, which was chucked out as being unworkable or not sufficiently attractive. So all they did is they pushed up the revenue and pushed down the costs until the Department of Public Enterprises said, okay, thank you, we'll accept that. What was already an unrealistic plan became completely fanciful. And in this past week, we've heard that even those projections are completely out the window now, because IATA studies have shown that what was expected to be a 45% recovery in airline activity next year has now been downgraded to a 30% recovery. So even if that original 10.5 billion had been realistic, which it wasn't, it is now completely unrealistic and quite frankly hopeless.
And government again saying that it wants SAA to emulate the ownership model of Telkom, which is partially owned by the government. We've heard that one before. But the reality, as you've just said, is given the current scenario, no one would really want to become a part owner.
Precisely. You know, the reality is that, to make a corny old cliche, the government can't have its cake and eat it. It can't have an airline that is expected to produce a return on investment or capital, in other words, be profitable and sustainable, and yet at the same time fulfill a development mandate. It requires the airline to operate presumably non-economic routes, at least while they're in the startup phase. It requires the airline to be a transformation tool, to have human capital development processes. But all of those will impact the bottom line and will, quite frankly, deter any foreign investor, apart from the laws which currently limit foreign investment to 25%. Again, you're not going to see a foreign investor accepting 25% of an airline that has a legacy of government interference.
And just finally, you would have to have some sympathy for the staff of the airline, again calling on citizens to give the airline, and I quote, one more chance. The reality is that in spite of the sympathy that we might feel, we've given SAA just too many chances, haven't we?
We really have. Now, I have every sympathy with the staff, and many of the pilots and other senior managers are acquaintances and friends of mine. And one feels desperately sorry that they haven't earned any income in the past 6 months. But the simple reality is that a clean sheet of paper would do them more good already. The airline has been cut down from 4,000 employees to just 1,000. And quite frankly, those jobs are hanging by a thread anyway because of the unrealistic nature of the planning going ahead. So it's just not a win-win situation at all. Quite frankly, it's a lose-lose. The only highlight, or the only small point of advantage to come out of the current 10.5 billion is at least the 2.2 billion that was allocated to the voluntary severance packages will now be paid. But it's too high a cost. We've seen that the government is getting this 10.5 billion out of absolutely essential services, policing, income, health, and so on. There is a far greater need to subsidise or provide funds for those services than there is to subsidise expensive airline seats.
Tilting at windmills at a very low and dangerous altitude. Editor of SA Flyer, Leitch, as always, thank you very much for joining us.